The loneliness epidemic is causing a crisis. Over 60% of US adults report feeling lonely on a regular basis. Now, increased internet and social media use have complicated the situation. And while I do see a lot of people talking about the prevalence of loneliness and attributing it solely to social media, I feel like there's a deeper problem here. We live in an era where it is easier than ever to connect with people, yet harder than ever to build genuine trust. We can message thousands of followers, but struggle to name 5 people who would challenge our worst ideas out of genuine care for our well being. We think that by finding people who think like us, we can alleviate this feeling of loneliness. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding of what friendship actually means. And it's making us lonelier, more paranoid, and frankly, less capable of functioning as a democratic society. Today, I want to explore why this is happening through the lens of perhaps the greatest philosopher of friendship, Aristotle. Aristotle identified 3 distinct types of relationships that we often confuse for friendship. Most of what we consider friendship online falls into the least meaningful categories. First, there are friendships of utility, relationships based on what people can do for each other. Think networking events, LinkedIn connections, or that person whose car you borrow but whose opinions you could not care less about. These relationships are simply transactional. They're perfectly fine, but they're not deep friendships, and they dissolve the moment the utility disappears. If you have no use for them, then you have no use for the relationship. Second, there are friendships of pleasure, relationships based on shared enjoyment. Your gaming buddy, your meme sharing group chat, and the people that you party with. Again, these relationships serve a purpose, but they're fundamentally about what feels good right now. So when the fun stops, so does the friendship. Now, these are typically the friendships you can see dissolve once, say, kids come into the picture, because now your priorities in life are no longer about fun, but responsibility. And then there is the third category, friendships of virtue. These are the relationships based on mutual care for each other's character and well being. Genuine friends don't just agree with you for the sake of agreeing, they challenge you, they correct you, and sometimes they tell you things you don't want to hear because they care more about your growth than your comfort, and you do the same for them. Now, our modern understanding of friendship has gone completely off the rails. We've created digital spaces where disagreement is seen as hostility, where challenging someone's ideas is treated as a personal attack, and where the highest form of friendship is just endless validation. But according to Aristotle, it's mutual enablement masquerading as care, not friendship. And to add fuel to this raging fire of mistrust and fake friendships, the problem exists outside of social media. It's not just online Reddit forums that fuel distrust. We have increasingly isolated ourselves into ideological social spheres and geographical political areas. In 1976, only 27% of Americans lived in politically landslide counties where one party won by 20 points or more. By 2016, that number had jumped to 61%. Now, part of this could be gerrymandering. But part of it is genuine ideological isolation because of our lack of tolerance for those with different political views. We're moving to places where everyone thinks like us, works like us, and votes like us. On college campuses, which should theoretically be spaces for intellectual diversity and challenge, the numbers are even more stark. According to multiple studies, faculty at major universities lean left by ratios of 10 to 1 or even 20 to 1 in some departments. This creates a very dangerous precedent for our youth because the same problem would exist even if the ratios were reversed. The point is, when institutions designed for learning become ideological homogeneous, they stop producing the kind of intellectual friction that creates real growth. And famous philosopher Karl Popper warned us of this. In The Open Society and Its Enemies, Popper connects closed and homogeneous societies with totalitarianism because they are built on uncritical conformity, rigid hierarchies, tribal mentalities, and unquestioned traditions. In such societies, individuals are expected to subordinate themselves to collective rules, group customs, or authority figures without challenge. The system values stability, sameness, and certainty over pluralism, critical debate, and individual freedom. Popper argues that the psychological comfort of uniformity and lack of dissent, or the closed society, appeals to people because it provides order and predictability. However, this comfort comes at the cost of freedom and self criticism. It suppresses questioning, stifles dissent, and thus paves the way for authoritarian and totalitarian rule. Social media platforms have supercharged this tendency. The algorithm does not want to challenge you, it wants to engage you. And what is more engaging than having your existing beliefs confirmed and amplified? The result is that we are creating digital and real world echo chambers that are really dangerous for society and the individual, which leads us to what researchers are calling the friendship recession. Despite having more ways to connect than ever before and the ability to find like minded people, Americans report having fewer close friends than at any point in recorded history. The average American now claims to only have about 1.9 friends, down from 3.5 in 1990. And more troubling, 15% of men report having no close friends at all. But I would argue that the numbers are worse than they appear because we're using the word friend for relationships that Aristotle would barely recognize as acquaintances. How many of your social media friends have ever disagreed with you about something important? How many have challenged a decision that you were making that they thought was harmful to you? How many even know you well enough to offer that meaningful criticism? The reality is that most of our online relationships fall into Aristotle's first two categories: utility and pleasure. But we're treating them as if they are virtuous friendships. We're expecting Twitter followers to provide the emotional support that traditionally came from people who knew us deeply enough to call us out when we were wrong. And this brings us to the central paradox of digital friendship. The very mechanisms that make connection easier make trust harder. When someone agrees with everything you say online, how do you know if they're genuinely supportive or just avoiding conflict? When someone shares your posts and likes your content, are they engaging with your ideas or just performing social media friendship? Real trust, according to many philosophers, develops through repeated interactions where people demonstrate care for your well being, even when it's inconvenient for them. But digital platforms are designed to make interaction convenient and friction free. The result is that we develop what feels like intimacy, like people knowing details about our lives, our opinions, and our daily activities. But we don't actually develop genuine trust. Think about it. If someone you follow on social media suddenly stopped liking your posts, would you notice? Would you care? If they disagreed with you on something that you posted, would you interpret that as disloyalty rather than honest engagement? Most likely. Would you trust them to watch your kids? Would you trust them to watch your siblings? Probably not. But you trust them to agree with you. These reactions reveal how shallow our digital relationships actually are and how little it's adding to our lives. What's particularly dangerous about this echo chamber of friendships is that they create the illusion of moral certainty while actually undermining moral development. When everyone in your digital bubble shares your outrage, validates your opinions, and conforms your worldview, it becomes almost impossible to recognize when you might be wrong about something important. And this is exactly what Aristotle warned against. He argued that virtue is developed through practice, correction, and the kind of moral friction that comes from engaging with people who challenge your assumptions. But if all of your friends agree with you all the time, you never develop the intellectual humility that comes from being wrong and having someone you trust help you see it. The result is that we're becoming less tolerant of disagreement, as evidenced by the recent events. And just in full transparency, I wrote this before everything happened, and I was going to save this video for a much later time. But because of everything that's happening, I thought that this was important to discuss. And we're not becoming more confident in our beliefs, but we're just becoming less tolerant of others. And we are much less practiced at defending them. When you're used to immediate validation, any pushback can feel like an attack. When you're accustomed to echo chambers, intellectual diversity feels threatening rather than enriching. So, how do we actually build genuine friendships in a digital age that seems designed to prevent them, and in a political climate that seems designed to just keep agreeing with your side? The answer isn't to abandon technology or pick your family up and move to a red state or a blue state, but we should embrace something different, embrace a different opinion, and use technology more intentionally. First, actively seek out people who disagree with you and do it in a constructive way. This doesn't mean following people who insult you or argue in bad faith. Instead, look for people who hold different views, but demonstrate genuine care for truth and for the people that they're engaging with. These relationships are going to feel uncomfortable at first, especially for younger people, because we've been trained to equate agreement with acceptance. But this discomfort is actually the feeling of intellectual growth. Second, practice what researchers call radical honesty in your digital relationships. If you're going to share online, share your genuine struggles, your doubts, and your failures. Real friendship develops through vulnerability, and vulnerability requires risk. When you post something authentic that might not get likes, you're creating a space for genuine connection rather than just performative validation. Third, take your digital relationships offline. Now, this doesn't mean just meet up with random people that you talk to for about 20 minutes. If you're on the right, maybe go to a coffee shop and talk to the girl with the nose ring. If you're on the left, go to a shooting range and develop a relationship with the girl that wears boots for fun. Aristotle emphasized that friendships require sharing life together. And there's something about physical presence that digital interaction cannot fully replicate. Meet for coffee, take a walk, engage in shared projects that require cooperation rather than just parallel consumption of content. And fourth, develop what I call friendly skepticism, the practice of questioning ideas, not to attack the person holding them. This means asking genuine questions like, help me understand why you think that, or what evidence would change your mind, instead of just immediately disagreeing or agreeing. Democracy requires citizens who engage with different viewpoints, who change their minds when presented with evidence, and maintain relationships across the lines of disagreements. But if we're all living in separate echo chambers, validated by algorithmic friends who never challenge us, then we lose the civic muscles that democracy requires. The rise of political polarization, the breakdown of shared truth, and the inability to have productive conversations across political aisles is a problem. They're the result of a society that has forgotten how to practice the kind of care that sometimes requires people saying things that you don't want to hear. Aristotle's vision of virtue friendship is precisely what we need to navigate in our complex digital age. This doesn't mean that every relationship you have has to be deep and challenging. We still need utility friendships for practical cooperation and pleasure friendships for fun and relaxations. But if all of our relationships fall into these categories, then we are missing out on the kind of human connection that actually sustains us through difficult times and helps us develop wisdom rather than just accumulating information. The alternative, a world of shallow connections, echo chambers thinking, and the slow erosion of our capacity for trust, is far, far worse, as we have seen in the past couple of weeks. So, with that said, thank you guys for watching. And if you have any more additional insights, questions, or video suggestions, leave them in the comments. And as always, don't forget to subscribe, and I will see y'all next time.